Welcome everyone. This is our ninth and final class of this course on the latter part of chapter 9, and tonight we'll also go through chapter 10, the dedication verses. So um, let's go ahead and pull up the prayers and get things started. May not have it right on the prayers. There they go. We'll start as usual with the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. We'll do the mandala offering prayer. Well, let me get it in the right place here so we can see all the words. Again, making this vast pure offering to receive the blessings of all the holy beings so we can actualize these teachings in our mind, especially this wisdom realizing emptiness that is so crucial. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. Then finally, Refuge and Bodhichitta before the teaching, as usual, the first time in English and the other 2 in Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chanyen gi pe sonam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shog sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi Daki Chanyen Gipe Sonam Gi Dola Penshir Sangye Drupar Shog. Okay, then let's do a short meditation. Oh, I think I just zapped one of my files. I'll have to pull it up later anyway. So let's do just a few minutes of meditation on the breath. Give ourselves a chance to kind of calm the mind and come into this space together. And then we'll set our motivation together. I'll lead you in that shortly. So we'll begin the meditation now.
Nice.
So to set our motivation for tonight, let's begin by simply rejoicing that we've had the opportunity to study this text, as well as especially to study this 9th chapter. This chapter that reveals the final wisdom that we all need to develop if we are ever to know true freedom, if we are ever to become fully enlightened. And just really generate great joy in your heart that you have used your time to come to these classes, to study, to engage in these teachings, to discuss them, and rejoice in the others who have taken part in this as well. And we use the practice of rejoicing not just to increase our merit, to produce this sort of positive energy that is necessary for our path as well, but moreover to encourage us to practice more, to continue to endeavor in the path to enlightenment by rejoicing in all the good things we have done. We create a similar energy for continuing to do more in the future, to engage in virtue, to practice the teachings we've learned, and to continue to develop our compassion, our wisdom, until we can eventually attain the final goal, the goal of complete enlightenment. And it is important then that we set this motivation for our time together again tonight. We recall Bodhichitta, which was introduced in the very first chapter. This mind of awakening, intent upon being of greatest benefit to all beings, and recognizing that to do that, we have to develop ourselves completely. We're simply incapable of helping others to that degree in our current state. So recalling the preciousness of this mind that Shantideva spoke to, the importance of this mind as the elixir that will solve the ills of all beings, that will free them all from suffering and will result in their eventual enlightenment. It starts with that thought in our own hearts right now, that wish to become a Buddha for the sake of all these beings. So hold that motivation very deeply in your heart tonight, so that it permeates not just our time together, but even outside of here, all the way through to the state of enlightenment, continues to motivate us and move us on our path. So again, it's so good to see you all tonight for this final class. Let's get a little grounded in where we're at. We have 2 more verses of chapter 9, so there's not so much of chapter 9 left. I don't know if there were any questions, burning questions from the discussion group. There wasn't maybe so much kind of meaty stuff in the last part that we went through last week, but any questions from discussion? No? Good. You're all fully realized. Okay, good. Let's go ahead and then take a look at where we're at. We're again in the last bit of this was mostly Shantideva giving us encouragement to engage in these teachings fully, to realize emptiness. And so let me show you tonight. Again, we're going to do these final 2 verses of chapter 9. Well, I'm going to do a short teaching on chapter 10, just going through some of the points that might be useful to know. There's not a lot of, there is commentary you could give on each of these dedication verses, but I'm mostly going to just touch on the ones where maybe there's some terminology that you might need to know, as well as we'll do the little introduction, the very first verse, and the commentary from Abbot Dr. Gyaltsen on that. So these first 2 verses are located in the final section of this advice that it is suitable to strive in realizing emptiness. So he went through the actual advice and then showing the object of great compassion of this mind that again is so essential to develop in order to cultivate bodhicitta. And this was but done by showing the disadvantages of psychic existence. So we saw that, there are sufferings in this life, sufferings in the next life. Even if we get a good rebirth, we don't have ideal opportunities, ideal situations to practice the Dharma. And there's even great difficulty in obtaining such an existence. So we went through all of that last time. Now we're in the final section, which is on page 82 of Gyaltsabje's commentary on chapter 9, showing the mode of apprehension of the aspect of great compassion. So again, this is all working with this idea of compassion that is motivated or informed by our understanding of emptiness, that we recognize that all sentient beings are suffering due to the ignorance that is grasping at things as if they had true existence. And the wisdom that realizes the emptiness of true existence is what will cut to the root of their suffering and cause them to be able to attain enlightenment as well. So when we see sentient beings through that lens, then we recognize that they are suffering needlessly, really. I mean, every one of us is suffering needlessly. If we only had that wisdom to reverse that ignorance, it would all be over. So again, this is the importance of generating compassion that is informed by the wisdom, understanding that things are lacking inherent existence, sentient beings lack inherent existence, and so on. So in verse 166, Shantideva says, "In that manner, when may I pacify those tormented by the fire of suffering with the rain of accumulations of happiness springing forth excellently from the clouds of my merit?" So he's kind of making that thought of, when may I be able to do this compassion that is so driven that we just can't wait to taste that final result where we'll be able to pacify the sufferings of others through what we have accumulated in terms of the development of ourselves. Our own merit. So again, recall that on the Buddhist path, in terms of achieving Buddhahood, the main objective is to benefit others, but it's not that we're neglected in the process of that. We develop ourselves fully and achieve our greatest happiness, so we then can help others. And so there's never any shortage of our own welfare and our own well-being in this formula. It's just that's not the main objective. The main objective is to benefit others. So here, Gyaltsabje says on page 82, having contemplated the way they who experience terrifying suffering in their continuum, in the way explained earlier, are afflicted by suffering. It's kind of weird wording. Having contemplated the way they who experience terrifying suffering in their continuum, in the way explained earlier, are afflicted by suffering, one should meditate on great compassion in the following manner, keeping in mind the sentient beings that are tortured by the fires of suffering in mind. When will I become someone that pacifies the sufferings of the lower realms with medicine, food, and the like, that which are parts of my collection of happiness built up from clouds of merits, built up by generosity and so forth? How wonderful would it be if sentient beings were free from suffering? May they be free from suffering. May I bring about that freedom. So again, you have those two aspects of compassion. Compassion that is simply the wish that others not suffer. And then what was said in the last line, may I bring about that freedom from suffering. That's great compassion. That's when we take that personal responsibility and we say, I will do whatever it takes to alleviate the suffering of others. And as I said, we don't get shortchanged in the process. His Holiness calls this being wisely selfish. If we really want to achieve our greatest welfare, we stay focused on the welfare of others. So this, harkens back to some degree to what we saw in the 8th chapter when we looked at the technique of equalizing and exchanging self and others for developing bodhicitta, that we want all of what we do to result in the happiness of others, cherish them mostly rather than ourselves. Then we have the verse 167, the last verse of chapter 9. When shall I respectfully collect the accumulation of merit in a manner of non-objectification and teach emptiness to those ruined by objectification? The word objectification means here that kind of imputing truly existent objects, truly existent people, things, whatever. And so we're saying, when will we, collect the accumulation of merit united with this wisdom that is not objectifying things, that is not holding them to be truly existent, and teach emptiness, the wisdom we've attained through that process, to those ruined by objectification, those who are under the control of this ignorance that does objectify things, that does cling to them as if they were inherently existent. So this is, again, just following up from what we've seen in chapter 9 about the need for us to remove our own ignorance, our own veil of ignorance, before we can help others to do the same. And that's why, again, all of it is about developing ourselves so that we then can be a benefit to others. So we have another section here that follows in the middle of page 82. Gyaltsab Je says, meditate in the following way on great compassion. Dedicating as the cause for liberation from the sufferings of psychic existence, when will I realize that all phenomena lack inherent existence, and respectfully build up the infinite accumulations of merit, of generosity, and so forth, with the method of the objectless wisdom? Because again, your merit becomes even more powerful when you unite it with wisdom. Because if we are engaged in the act of generosity with understanding the emptiness of the three spheres, we're going to come across this a little bit later, but the idea being that when we see things as lacking inherent existence, ourselves, the act we're engaged in, the object of that action, that all of this it causes a great increase in our merit. It unites wisdom and compassion in a kind of complementary way so that we then can develop ourselves completely. By the way, Rinpoche uses this word merit to refer to both accumulations. He calls it the merit of virtue for what we traditionally call merit, and the merit of wisdom for wisdom. So you have virtue and wisdom that are both meritorious. They both are accumulations that we need to engage in, obviously. So then it says, when will I show emptiness to the sentient beings that are destitute in psychic existence, due to the object of true grasping, to pacify their samsaric suffering? So we have that thought as well. When may I be in that place where I can actually skillfully benefit others through conveying that wisdom to them, helping them to develop their minds so they can be free of their own ignorance and eventually remove their own obscurations to Buddhahood, to omniscience. And it says how wonderful it would be if all sentient beings were free from the suffering of cyclic existence. May I free them from that suffering. So as I said, this kind of does hearken to the, I mentioned this last week, Chandrakirti's homage to great compassion at the very beginning of the text that we studied in the master's program, the supplement to the middle way, Madhyamakavatara, where he pays homage to three types of compassion. I mentioned these last week, I'll just reiterate them. The first one, where we're simply observing sentient beings qualified by their suffering, seeing them through the lens of all of the various sufferings they experience, especially recalling the three types of suffering, not just the grosser forms, more obvious or evident forms of suffering, but also the suffering of change, and of course the deepest, the suffering of pervasive conditioning, that they are under the control of their karma and delusions, and in this way continue to take rebirth again and again and again. And then we have the second type of compassion, or great compassion. All these are great compassion, not just, again, wanting people to not suffer, but to be the agent of helping them to not suffer. And the second one is where we observe sentient beings as momentary, impermanent, changing continually. And within that is the understanding that they don't know things that way. They cling to things as if they were permanent and unchanging, and in this way cause themselves even greater pain. So when they're qualified by impermanence, then we have another understanding of what causes them suffering, misconceptions around things that are impermanent being held to be permanent and unchanging. Then we have the final compassion, great compassion, that is observing the unapprehendable, is what it's often called. And it's the idea that we can't apprehend true existence, but nonetheless, there's a grasping at inherent existence while sentient beings lack inherent existence. And if we understand that sentient beings are clinging to themselves as if they were real in that way, and by virtue of that, engaging in all kinds of negativity, just as we ourselves do, through the force of that ignorance, through our attachment, our hatred, all of the actions that follow from that, then we have even greater compassion, because we see once more the root of their suffering is this misconception. And moreover, because we have the understanding through what we've done here in looking at chapter 9 and all of our other investigations into emptiness, that this is contrary to how things actually exist. So they're clinging to something as if it were real, and it's not real in the way that they think it is at all. Again, it's not that there's no reality. We've talked about that many times during this chapter, but that reality is very, very subtle, very slight, only nominal existence. And if we knew that at the deepest level, all our clinging would be totally deflated. We wouldn't have any energy behind that because we wouldn't be holding that object that we have held for beginningless time to be real. And we therefore wouldn't be having anger and attachment on the basis of that and all of the other actions that follow. So again, it all begins by being able to remove this ignorance in ourselves, and then we can help sentient beings to be free from it. Gyaltsab continues, and he says, to fulfill the definition of great love and compassion that are contained in the Mahayana path, one needs to wish to place sentient beings in the state of complete enlightenment that is endowed with all happiness and which is free from all suffering. So again, great compassion and great love aren't just about helping sentient beings to have freedom from manifest suffering, suffering of pain. No, it's about taking them to the full extent, complete freedom from all suffering, and moreover, complete freedom from all the obscurations, everything that binds them in any way and keeps them from actualizing their full potential. So this is the type of compassion and love that we want to generate for beings, is not, limited in any way, but to take them to the greatest result. And it says, in short, one should meditate on the mode of abiding in dependence on calm abiding. Remember, we talked about calm abiding in chapter 8, the perfection of concentration. Further, because the I of the thought I is established as merely labeled in dependence on the aggregates and does not exist inherently, it does not exist intrinsically. It is not established in the slightest in an independent mode. Therefore, the existent person is merely posited in name. It exists only as labeled and in a dependent mode. Hence, take to heart, it does not exist inherently. So kind of a nice little summary of everything that we've looked at in terms of coming to that final understanding of how the I actually exists. Of course, we have to get this for ourselves. We really have to understand this in terms of ourselves before we can help others truly to know that wisdom as well. So again, but when we do see sentient beings driven by that ignorance to engage in all these negativities and perpetuate their suffering, it should really break our hearts. Then it says meditate in the same way on all phenomena, such as the aggregates and so forth, because it's not just the I that we have a misconception with regard to, it's also all other phenomena, as we saw in that in this course, the latter part of chapter 9, when we looked at the selflessness of phenomena through a variety of reasonings. So here I want to share just a little bit from Abbot Dr. Gyaltsen's commentary. It says, thus, on this occasion, of having obtained just once a support in which the leisures and endowments, these qualities of this perfect human rebirth are complete, you must make effort in the methods for generating in your continuum the profound middle way view. This is what we were looking at last week. Shantideva telling us we shouldn't be waiting until our next life. We've got the perfect opportunity right now, right here. Just like Pabanka Rinpoche's text title, right? Liberation in the palm of your hand, enlightenment in the palm of your hand. It's right here. And we should make effort in doing this right now. As long as one has not gained the good fortune of relying by way of thought and application upon an excellent spiritual teacher who gives proper instructions on the mode of profound suchness, it will be difficult to realize even a portion of the middle way path of dependent arising, which is free from the extremes. So it's kind of interesting. It goes back to the very beginning of the Lam Rim. The Lam Rim topics start with the reliance upon a spiritual guide, a spiritual teacher. And this is the importance of having a spiritual guide, is that we are embarking on a spiritual path that we have never completed. We've never done it before. We need to rely upon those beings who have gone further on that path, who have even actualized that path in their own minds to some degree, if not completely. And so we do have to rely upon expert guides. And I'll say, I think I've mentioned this at least once in this course, perhaps more times, but it is really important. You've received these teachings from me on chapter 9, but I'm not a realized being. I'm just somebody who studied this, through various teachings I've had and what have you. I don't really have any realizations to offer. It's so important that you study with the guidance of someone who you trust as a spiritual guide to take you to that full distance. That's why it's important to receive teachings from His Holiness, to receive teachings from Lama Zopa Rinpoche. When Rinpoche talks about emptiness, it's very, very experiential and very nice. So, you can get all these teachings online. You don't have to necessarily go to India or Nepal or various places or wherever Rinpoche happens to be when he starts touring again. It is important to have those in-person experiences, but do check out other teachers who are more qualified than myself. I can convey some meaning and some understanding, and of course fumbled over various parts of this because it's a very dense chapter, but know that there are beings out there who have actualized these teachings in their own mind. And it's very important that you take advantage of that. As I said, even through like a audio recording or a video recording or whatever. So I'll just emphasize that Gyaltsab J is doing, or I'm sorry, Abbot Dr. Gyaltsen's doing as well here in that quote that I just shared. Then it says, and through proper reliance upon such a spiritual teacher, all excellent accumulations will arise. This is why Lama Tsongkhapa himself says that the foundation of all good qualities is the kind and precious root guru. We need those gurus in our lives as the foundation, the support for all of our realizations, to develop ourselves completely. So I think that's the end of that part. Let's finish off what is in this section on page 83 of Gyaltsab J's commentary. And remember how at the end of each of these chapters, he usually includes a verse or two. And here he has actually 4 verses that are about emptiness and the perfection of wisdom. He says, I say this as a summary. For as long as one does not find a holy master, one will not even realize partially the middle way of dependent arising that is free from extremes, that can cut the root of existence. Whatever well-spoken advice I receive is due to the kindness of the Lama. May this virtue become the cause that my mothers meet a Mahayana guru, that all our mother sentient beings have that good fortune of meeting with a Mahayana guru who can lead them on this path to realize the profound view of emptiness and dependent arising. Without realizing the suchness of the middle way, free from extremes, one cannot touch the state of a superior, an Arya being, which of course is where you have that initial direct realization of emptiness on the path of seeing. When you attain that, you are technically called an Arya, a superior being, as opposed to an ordinary being, which preceded that realization. Hence, by deciding that dependent arising is the meaning of emptiness, strive accordingly in achievement. Remember, this is what Nagarjuna emphasizes is the complementary aspect of these two, that dependent arising and emptiness are pointing to the same thing. We're just looking at them from different aspects. Emptiness in terms of their lack of inherent or independent existence, and dependent arising in terms of their dependent nature, that they have dependence upon, again, the 3 levels that we've spoken to frequently. Those things that are produced from their causes and conditions, they depend upon those. Those things that are permanent as well, all phenomena dependent upon their parts, whether they be directional or spatial parts or temporal parts. And then finally, the dependence upon mere imputation, labeling, as we just saw on that previous page, Gyaltsab J pointing out that really subtlest level of dependent arising that has to be realized. And seeing that is completely complementary to emptiness. There's no contradiction whatsoever in these two kind of ways of looking at phenomena. And we saw that again in the beginning of chapter 9. We looked at the 2 truths and how the 2 truths can be posited with regard to everything that exists. Its conventional nature, which is its dependent arising, and its ultimate nature, its emptiness. And the final verse here. That difficult to find even in a billion eons, because the pure school of Nagarjuna pronouncing the 2 truths, because they will disappear before long in this realm, those with intelligence will quickly generate joyous effort. So Gyaltsab J saying here, if we really get it and we really are, we've been handed this, through the kindness of our gurus, all these amazing beings who have come before us, who have kept these teachings alive, century after century. We're being handed it, and we have to do something with this. We have to at least carry the baton a little further in the race so that when we hand it off to our next life, we're in a better position to make even greater headway. But if possible, to attain enlightenment in this life. which of course they say is not possible through merely the sutra path. This whole text has been mostly alluding to the sutra path. I've had only minimal tantric references, and they really are nothing overt. Tantra is the path that is capable of producing enlightenment much more quickly. And of course, that it requires a solid foundation in sutra. And that's what we were gaining through, studying this text. But we should have that enthusiasm, a desire to become enlightened as quickly as possible, that will lead us to be successful at not just our sutra studies, but then to enter the tantric path and achieve enlightenment on that basis. So then we have the final section, explanation of the title, which every one of these chapters has. And it says, this is the commentary on the 9th chapter, called The Perfection of Wisdom, from the commentary on the introduction to the actions of bodhisattvas. That's the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, called The Entrance for the Children of the Conquerors. So that's chapter 9. Let me introduce chapter 10, and what we're going to do tonight for the rest of this evening is, as I said, first go through a little bit. I'm not going to go through the entire structure of chapter 10. I'll show you one kind of sheet that has all the outline headings. We saw it if you did print out the Gyaltsip J's text, you'll see all the outline headings. And there's dedications for all sorts of specific things that are more about overt forms of suffering in samsara. There are also, of course, dedications for more final results that we want all beings to attain. But this chapter is said to be a kind of exposition to some degree, though it doesn't go into great detail as Shantideva did for the other perfections. It's about the perfection of generosity, which, as you'll recall, is the very first of the 6 perfections. So in regard to chapter 10, it's loosely alluded to as being on the perfection of generosity, though, as I said, it doesn't go into any great detail about how to practice generosity. But I'm going to talk a little bit about that first. And then, of course, we'll go through the verses a little bit and recite them all at the end as a means of dedicating all the merit from our study. Whoops. Somehow it's clicking twice. Generosity, this is from Geshe Loden in his Lamrim book, contemporary Lamrim book, that is really quite wonderful, quite difficult to obtain and very expensive. But it says, generosity is those actions of body, speech, and mind motivated by the virtuous thought to give. Any generosity motivated by bodhicitta becomes a perfection of generosity. So again, if we unite any act of giving with the mind of aspiring to become a Buddha for the sake of others, it becomes part of the accumulation of what will be our perfection of generosity that culminates in the complete enlightenment. So thus the determinant of the perfection of generosity is not the physical act of giving, which of course is still involved in it, but is not the determinant, nor the gift that we give itself. Rather, it is the virtuous mind of generosity, motivated by bodhicitta, that precedes and accompanies the action of giving. So again, this is just the measure of what we're really trying to do, is to increase the intention to give, the virtuous mind that wants to give for the sake of the welfare of all beings, with that motivation of bodhicitta. Recall that back in chapter 5, we talked about how each of the 6 perfections were perfected in our own minds, not perfected outside. So we saw there in verse 9, where the first of the 6 perfections was talked about, if the perfection of generosity were the alleviation of migrating beings' poverty, if that was the measure of perfecting your generosity, is you get rid of all the poor, no beings have any need for any resources anymore because they're satisfied. Well then, since there are still starving migrating beings, in what manner did the previous protectors perfect it? So if other Buddhas have attained that state of enlightenment where they've achieved the perfection of generosity, well then how did they do it if it was based on an external measure? So Abhidharma Gyaltsen, this is all sharing from that class we did on chapters 4 and 5. If the completion of the perfection of generosity were the perfection of generosity through the alleviation of all migrating beings' poverty, then, since there are still starving migrating beings, in what manner did the previous protector Buddhas perfect the perfection of generosity? It would follow that they didn't complete it. So then he says in verse 10, what is meant by it? He says the perfection of generosity is taught to be the mind intending to give all things, as well as its result, meaning the resultant merit that we accumulate through giving, to all beings. Hence, it is simply the mind. And Abbot Dr. Gyaltsen said, thus, its completion is taught to be the perfection of generosity by way of the mind that wishes to give all bodies, resources, roots of virtue, and things, as well as the merit, the result of giving, to all beings. Hence, generosity is simply contingent on the mind. Now having said that, I want to caution people to think that it doesn't mean that you then just sit in your house and practice giving all day and you're never challenged to give physically to others and what have you. We do hopefully the intention to give manifests in our physical giving, but know that once more, it's not contingent upon that actual act happening and the alleviation of suffering there as much as it is on perfecting our mind that is willing to give everything away. But if we've perfected that mind, then the actions naturally follow. On the first ground of the 10 grounds where you've achieved your direct realization of emptiness for the first time, it said that the Bodhisattva at that level has the perfection of generosity, and they are able to give their body freely to any being in the same manner that the Buddha, when he was the Bodhisattva prince, gave his body to the tigress who was starving. Her tiger cubs that she had just given birth to, those 5 tiger cubs, were all starving as well. And the Buddha was moved by with great compassion for this tigress, and he severed his own flesh so that the tigress could begin to eat his body, so she could regain her strength, feed her cubs, and survive. And he lost his own life for the sake of these beings, just these 6 animals. But again, this is what the perfection of generosity in one's own mind leads you to do, is to have that freedom. And once more, you can see how when you unite it with the wisdom of emptiness, there's no self that you're clinging to then. There's no fear of losing yourself because you're giving your body to other beings. You're not clinging to that strong sense of self and that attachment to our bodies that keeps us from being able to engage wholeheartedly in that practice. But we see then the importance of developing our minds to that degree. But as I was saying, any act of generosity that is mental should eventually result in something that we do physically, motivated in that way. So that when we practice in our mind having this intention to give, when somebody on the street asks us for money, we have no problem giving it to them. We just are very free with everything that we have because we have practiced fine-tuning our own thought, our intention to give. So these are the 4, often it's only 3 in the Lam Rim, and the 4th one, giving love, is added based on the tantric teachings. But giving material things is where most of our giving starts, and we can begin by giving small amounts of money or things, bird seed to birds, or when you feed your pets, you're giving them food. That's coming out of your wallet. Your pets aren't working for you, making money and then buying their own food. So every time you feed your pets, every time you do something where you're giving something material to another being, try to have it motivated by bodhicitta. This is a very powerful place to begin our practice of generosity. And we should feel once more eventually that when people ask us for something, we should be delighted to hear, can you give me something? Those words will be just so delightful for the bodhisattva to hear. Giving Dharma is said to be the best of all of these, because giving Dharma doesn't just relieve the suffering in the moment. It helps sentient beings to have relief in the long run. By practicing the Dharma, they will be able to be free of their own suffering. So ideally, it is best to give Dharma. And we can give Dharma in a variety of ways. It doesn't have to be in the mode that I'm doing, of being a teacher and what have you. It can be giving advice to those who seek advice from us, and putting it in ways that make them very approachable. The teachings sometimes might be difficult for people, but if we simply present them in ways that help them to see how they can look at things differently, how they can have a little more contentment within their minds and so on. These are really wonderful ways to give the Dharma to our friends, colleagues, what have you, family. Giving protection. Giving protection means those beings who are in danger of losing their lives or having some suffering that will follow, we free them from that. One of the powerful practices that Rinpoche encourages people to engage in is animal liberation, where you take beings who are slated to have their lives taken for whatever. They're going to be slaughtered for for food, their flesh to become food. Or we often do hear worms that are going to be used for fishing, to catch fish. So if you liberate the worms by putting them into your compost pile, and there's a whole ceremony for doing it. You don't just take them and put them there. You do all these mantras and various things to help these beings while you have them there with you, to bless their mind so that they can have these imprints of the Dharma. But we want to do whatever we can to protect those who are in danger, those who are vulnerable in our society, and so on. This is kind of a sort of social um, action aspect of Buddhism, where we do want to do what we can to protect those beings who are subject to suffering on whatever basis, status, sexual orientation, gender, whatever, race, all the various things. We want to kind of make that manifest in our actions as well, to protect those who are in danger of experiencing, whoops, I somehow got on the wrong screen, who are in danger of experiencing anything that will harm them. Then we have giving love. Giving love, as I said, isn't normally in the traditional Lam Rim texts, and it's from the tantric teachings, where you are to give the thought of love to other beings, the wish for them to be happy, so that you practice this with every being that you meet. I remember in one of the videos for Discovering Buddhism, it's on the Bodhichitta module, where Richard Gere says he practiced doing this for a while and he found it so transformative, where every being that you meet, your first thought, rather than who is this person, what do they want from me, whatever, instead you have your first thought be, may you have happiness. May you have all the causes of happiness. Have that be your first thought to every being that you meet. You're greeting them all with love, and by virtue of that, you are protecting them from danger, because they know there's nothing to fear from you, because what you exude when you meet beings in this way is very, very powerful. So anyway, these are the more manifest ways of giving. Obviously, giving away our merit is what's being focused on in regard to this chapter, which is in a sense taking all of what we gain in our own spiritual development, all of that positive potential, and freely giving it to other beings so they can experience the result, which is a very meritorious action. The merit of giving away your merit is meritorious itself. It's like you gain merit from giving away merit. And of course, you can keep giving away that merit and giving away that merit. But the reality is that when we think of others first, this will be our natural inclination, is to give that merit to others. We practice that at the end of each of these teachings, when we give that merit to first those beings that we feel quite close to who are suffering, and imagining them receiving it, freely giving it, so that we aren't the beneficiaries of that, they are. And then we imagine giving it to all beings, at the very tail end of each of these classes, imagining them all having these same positive results. So this chapter is about generosity, though, as I said, Shantideva doesn't go into each of these specific types. He focuses on the idea that we want to give our merit to others so that they experience the fruition of that. So it doesn't become about ourselves. So we once more combat that mind of self-cherishing. So chapter 10, I want to point out that I found it a little strange, and I think I figured out why it was happening. From verse 41 on, Gyaltsabje's commentary that Venerable Fedor did, it's different from what we have in the basic program one, because there's one verse, I think it is verse 41, that only had 3 lines in it rather than the traditional 4. And there's a line, I think, that must have been missing, because Ziggy, in her translation, which is the translation of the text that we use, actually puts that in verse 41. It's in brackets. So for whatever reason, Venerable Fedor thought that that was enumerated beginning on page 15 of Gyaltsabje's commentary. Actually, I can put it up on the screen, because I did put that file in there. Let me share it on the screen, and you'll get an idea of what I'm talking about here. So on page, sorry if this is making anyone dizzy, page 15, you'll see that there it says dedicating for the Sangha in general. The previous verse, 41 ABC, there are actually, again, only these 3 lines for verse 41, but Ziggy inserts another second line in there before the other 2. And so we'll see that when we go through the actual text. But if we go down to what Venerable Fedor did here, he included that as 41D. But technically, these 4 lines that are in front of you right now are all verse 42. And then going forward, it's the same thing for all of these. So he's got this kind of weird enumeration. And again, I'm not faulting him in any way. He was working with the text and made that interpretation of how this was to be dealt with in terms of the numbers. But the traditional way is, again, to insert that additional line in there. And I don't know if that line is in the Sanskrit and it didn't make it into the Tibetan, or what the logic of, why that was missing. So let's go back to my slides and we'll just introduce this first verse and do a little teaching on that. And then I'll go through the rest of it. And then, as I said, we'll recite it together. This is the short dedication. May all sentient beings enter the Bodhisattva trainings. And this is the verse. By whatever virtue there is, due to my having composed engaging in the deeds of a Bodhisattva. Remember, this is Shantideva speaking. He's saying whatever he has accumulated through writing this text, he's dedicating in the following way. May all migrating beings engage in the deeds of the Bodhisattvas. In other words, may they all enter the Mahayana path, become fully qualified Bodhisattvas, engaging in the perfections, and culminate in their Buddhahood. So this was the commentary that was in the handout that I gave for this course, in particular, this 7th part of my teaching on the 10 chapters of Shantideva. By whatever virtue obtained by me, the composer of the treatise, having composed in detail, engaging in the deeds of the Bodhisattva, in the manner of a single person practicing the stages of the path of the three beings of the three scopes of capabilities in their entirety, encompassing the meaning of the content of all the scriptures, along with the result of the path of attaining Buddhahood. So this is all the introduction of what all this merit. Recall that this the three beings of the three scopes of capabilities refers to the Lam Rim, the stages of the path that are divided into those three levels that I think all of you are familiar with. So through all of this merit, that everything he's engaged in personally, his having composed this text, all of the virtues he's accumulated, and whatever virtue of explaining this treatise, hearing and thinking about the meaning, may all migrating beings engage properly in the deeds of the Bodhisattvas. This is like the greatest wish that we can have for beings. I mean, of course, we want them to all attain Buddhahood. That's perfectly fine wish. That's what we often do in our prayers and what have you. But we want them all to enter the Mahayana path that is the means for attaining that. We want to see them all become Bodhisattvas and all practicing these perfections that we've explored in this text. Goes on to cite the sutra requested by Sagara Mati, which says, just as a drop of water that falls into the great ocean is not exhausted until the ocean dries up, likewise, virtue thoroughly dedicated to enlightenment is not exhausted until one attains enlightenment. And that's the result that it culminates in. We can even say that to some degree, the merit isn't even exhausted when one attains enlightenment, because it continues to manifest in your deeds of a Buddha, your enlightened activities, when you are being able to manifest for the countless sentient beings in the varieties of ways and teach them the Dharma and lead them on their path. So just as explained above, Abbot Dakpa Gyaltsen says, virtues that will otherwise yield little results will yield extensive ones. And also, those that, if not dedicated, will become exhausted at some point, will never exhaust and only increase instead. So these are kind of, we could say, two benefits of dedicating, is that you create even more extensive results through your virtues, because it's like you're putting those drops of water into this ocean. They kind of take on the whole quality of the ocean. They take on a much bigger potential or power. And those that aren't, if they're not dedicated, they would become exhausted. Instead, by dedicating, they won't exhaust, and they will only increase and continue to develop. So having contemplated these benefits, even those who have created a little virtue should strive to dedicate it to unsurpassable enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. So I think this is one of the things we have to remember, is as we engage in our acts throughout our day, even giving, give to your, as I was saying earlier, you feed your pet every day. Most of you have a pet, many of you have a pet, maybe not all of you, I don't know. But when you feed a pet, you're taking something that you have, offering it to that being, have bodhicitta motivation. And after you fed them, dedicate the merit. I think one of the problems is we often forget to dedicate. So we kind of leave that sort of hanging out there. You get positive potential from any act of giving that you engage in or any other virtuous deed. But if you don't dedicate it, you don't create the causes for enlightenment. The motivation is one part, but the dedication is the other. We need those two bookends to make it complete. So this is an important thing to remember throughout our day. And if you especially remember at the end of each day to dedicate, thinking back over all the things that you did, just in case you missed dedicating, may through the force of my being kind to that person at the store, may that become the cause for my enlightenment. May my, having yielded to somebody else and let them have their say, may that become the cause for enlightenment. Even the smallest things we engage in, even those tiniest drops become part of this store of merit that becomes the cause for complete awakening. So it is important to dedicate. And Asanga's Bodhisattva Grounds also says, Bodhisattvas go into isolation, purify their thoughts by gathering their mind inwards, visualize from the bottom of their hearts boundless, extensive various types of phenomena that are objects of generosity by conceptualization with faith, and practice generosity to sentient beings. So again, all of our thoughts of giving, and especially of giving our merits to others, are powerful. We have to recognize the power of our minds to create merit. That's how all of our negative karma is created, through our minds and the physical and verbal deeds that follow. But it all starts with our minds, and we can give even when we're in isolation, in retreat. We can give all of these things to others. Thus, bodhisattvas will increase their collections boundlessly with slight hardship. That is the generosity of bodhisattvas possessing great wisdom. This should be, and then this is from Abbot Dr. Gyaltsen, this should be performed from the state of being conjoined with the wisdom that realizes that the three wheels, or spheres we often call them, of the virtue are not truly existent, just as has been explained in the 9th chapter. So again, when we talk about the three spheres or the three wheels, I alluded to this a little earlier tonight. Let's use the act of giving. The giver of that food to your pet, the act of giving that food, and either the food or the being, or both, the food that we're giving as well as the being who is receiving it, all three spheres, the giver, the act of giving, and the recipient, are empty of inherent existence. They don't have a single atom of inherent existence. So we want to have that awareness while we are engaged in these other conventional perfections. That's once more the method of uniting our wisdom and compassion, so that everything we do is infused by an understanding that there's no inherently existent I involved in this, no inherently existent act, no inherently existent object of that act. So these are all important factors to take into consideration with regard to our dedication. Then he says at the end, there is no great distinction between dedication and prayers. Nevertheless, those distinguished by the aspiration that seeks the desired result are prayers, whereas those distinguished by the aspiration that the virtues which are causes will become the cause of that result are dedication. So dedication is a subset of prayers in a sense, but it's distinguished from the general prayers that we make because it is specifically trying to create the wish that, or the intention that, whatever virtues that you've done become the cause of the result that you're seeking, rather than making prayers to achieve that result, for example. So then it goes on, of course, to the other verses. By the way, one thing I'm going to pass along with the slides from tonight, so it can be put on Shantideva's website, not Shantideva the person, Shantideva Center's website, is an additional handout. I realized when I was going through this that I missed adding in the way to practice wisdom, and then of course generosity with the other perfections. So this gives you an idea of how to practice each of these with wisdom on this page, going into the second page, and then how to practice generosity with the other perfections. Again, this is from Geshe Loden's text. So that handout will be in your materials that will get posted this week. Hopefully I'll be able to get things done a little quicker this week. We'll see. But so let's see. Let's go through the verses. Sorry if I'm making anyone dizzy again with this fast scrolling. I'm not going to read all of the verses right now because we're going to go through them. But what I've done is I've gone through the verses and I sort of highlighted where we have perhaps some things that might need some explanation. In verse 4, which is on the screen there, it says, however many hell beings there are throughout the realms of the worlds, may those embodied beings be delighted by the happiness of Sukhavati. So Sukhavati is often called kind of a land of great bliss. It's a pure land, a pure realm. And so we're kind of wishing for beings who are in the worst conditions, the hell beings who are in the most tormented states in samsara, to be delighted by all the bliss of these great pure lands that would replace all of that for them. So that's the idea behind it when we're reciting that verse with Sukhavati. I just wanted to point that out in case people don't know what Sukhavati is referring to. Then there's, of course, continuing with the hell beings and all these various references to certain hell realms. Most of you have studied the Lamrim, but in verse 6, it points out two specific things that are in these neighboring hells, the forest of sword-like leaves. By the way, what happens with the neighboring hells is they say once you exhaust the merit to be born in one of these particular hells, there are 8 hot hells, and there are 8 cold hells. There is a verse pertaining to the cold hells where we wish for them to have, what they need to satisfy them. After you finish with your time that your karma propelled you into that existence, for that duration, you then exit from that and you go through these neighboring hells because your suffering isn't over. You have to kind of exit from these various hell realms. So one of them that you go through is where there are these razor sharp leaves that they sort of cut up your entire flesh as you are going through them, the forest of sword-like leaves. And then we're wishing for that to become a pleasant grove. And then the Shalma trees, many of you have heard of the Shalma trees. We want them to become wish-fulfilling trees. These trees, it's really pretty despicable what happens to you on the basis of your karma there. These very tall trees, and the leaves are all facing up initially, it seems. And when you hear a voice of like your loved one from your previous life that really entices you due to your attachment to that person, it's at the top of the tree. So you start to go up the tree and all the leaves face downward then, and they cut you as you go up. So you become kind of shredded as you go up to the top of the tree. You get to the top of the tree, your loved one isn't there, and you hear their voice at the bottom of the tree. And then you go all the way down and the leaves go back up so that you are being shredded as you go all the way down. I mean, really horrific forms of suffering that belong in a horror film or something. But this is a kind of, again, making wishes that these places of great suffering be turned into just everything that will be the cause of happiness and well-being for these poor beings who are in the hell realm. And we may not have complete conviction in these hell realms, but we know that there's a lot of hell possible within this human existence. So it's not that far a stretch, I think, in some way, to think that there are entire realms that are the basis of the horrific things that people do in their lives. Verse 10:8. May the heaps of coals also become piles of jewels. May the burning iron ground that is in various hell realms be revealed as crystal floors, just totally transforming into something that is beautiful and not harmful. May the mountains of mass destruction hell become celestial mansions of offerings filled with sugatas. Well, what is mass destruction hell? I say this is often a karma when you've killed a lot of beings. And so what happens is these huge rocks, you're in the middle between these, and they're shaped in the form of the heads of the beings that you've killed, such as goats or sheep or cows or fish or whatever. And you are smashed in between these, like mass destruction of your entire being. And then they go apart, you reform, and then they smash you again. So, I mean, again, these realms are pretty horrible. When we think about ourselves going through it, we might not have as much dread perhaps as we should. But when we think about others, we should have that compassion that wants them to have that realm totally transformed into something beautiful. May the striking of each other with weapons. This is referring to the hell, the reviving hell, where essentially what happens there is you go out and there are other beings there that you are combating, and they slice you and kill you and what have you, and then you all are revived again and you do it again. You just keep repeating this act of horrific bloody warfare with each other. May those drowning in the fire-like river without ford. This is a river where you can't cross it except going into it, and in it you are consumed by these various creatures that eat away at your flesh. This is one of these neighboring hells as well. So you have all of these different things that we want to transform into beautiful places with flowers, with gently flowing streams. Whoops, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. was trying to hit this arrow down here. I have to go back up a little. I think that was it. Yeah, okay. Now we go into a little section, we'll see this when we read it, that pertains to kind of wishing for them to have these beings, these what were technically called bodhisattvas at the time of the Buddha, but they were actually said to be Buddhas manifesting as bodhisattvas. The three that we're going to make reference to here in those verses are Vajrapani, who represents the enlightened power of the Buddhas, Avalokiteshvara, or it's called here Padmapani, the one holding the lotus, who represents the enlightened compassion, the great compassion of all the Buddhas. And then we have Manjushri, or Manjughosha, as he's often referred to, as the embodiment of the great wisdom of the Buddhas. So these three are often highlighted as, and we even use that praise to Shakya, to Lama Tsongkhapa, the Migsema, where we talk about Tsongkhapa being Avalokiteshvara, Manjushri, and Vajrapani, all three aspects of the Buddhas embodied in one. But they are said to be three of the 8 bodhisattvas that again were Buddhas manifesting as perfect bodhisattvas, so that they could exemplify and model perfect bodhisattva behavior for all of the bodhisattva disciples. So essentially these are invoking the forces of these three. And I don't know that I need to say much more about those verses because they're seeing Vajrapani in verse 11, Padmapani, which again is another name. As I said, it means the lotus holder for Avalokiteshvara, the Buddha that represents the compassion of all the enlightened beings. And then the last two, 13 and 14, that refer to Manjughosha, the youthful one with the blazing top knot. Remember, Manjushri is holding this fire, this sword that is blazing with flames, the flames of wisdom that will burn away our ignorance. And then he has in his other hand a lotus that has a text on it, the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. And so he's this youthful 16-year-old body of this enlightened being who represents the perfection of wisdom, the enlightened wisdom of all the Buddhas. So then it says here, and then there's some, that was all the hell realm beings. Now we go into hungry ghosts and animals. These are the other two unfortunate rebirths, and they don't get as many verses. You get like 2 lines for the animals. May the animals be free and so on. And then you get the one for the hungry ghosts. And we're wishing for hungry ghosts are those beings who again are bereft of what will sustain them, food and drink. And when they try to partake of them, they have great suffering. We want them to be as happy as the human beings of unpleasant sound. Unpleasant sound is said to be one of the 4 continents where human beings abide in traditional cosmology in Buddhism. But it is said to be a human realm where you have a very long life. There's a set lifespan in unpleasant sound of 1,000 years. It's not like here where you can die at any time, and the longest that any being lives is roughly 100 and so years, 110, 120 maybe at the most. But essentially this realm is one where whatever you think of, you have immediately. You kind of have that wish-fulfilling capacity based on the good karma to be reborn in such a realm. Now, having said that, it's not necessarily the best place to be reborn, because without the motivation of understanding death and impermanence, sometimes it makes one's Dharma practice very weak, right? That's one of the most motivating factors, is the recognition that we could die at any moment. If you think you've got 1,000 years, well, what's the hurry? I mean, who wants to, practice immediately if you're going to live for another 900 years or something? So know that again, this is just wishing for them to have those kinds of experiences. Instead of being bereft of the resources they need to survive, may they have everything just as the beings in unpleasant sound have immediately. Then it says, may the blind see and the deaf always hear sounds. May, just as it was for Maya Devi, may pregnant women give birth without being harmed. And this is in a reference to Maya, the mother of the Buddha, who it said when she gave birth to the Buddha was done with no pain whatsoever. In fact, it said that it actually was a kind of a more sacred birth, came out of the side of Maya Devi rather than out of the birth canal. So again, we want all beings to have that benefit as well. A lot of what we make initially in this chapter is all these more temporal benefits in this life, to have freedom from fear and what have you. This line in verse 27, may beings be liberated from the non-leisures. Of course, the non-leisures means not having the leisures and endowments that we have in this human existence. So this means for all beings to have, perfect human existences. Whoops, and I forgot to highlight this one. It says right there, verse 28, may everyone, I'll highlight it right now while I'm doing this, may everyone, just like space treasury. What is space treasury? I'm going to read from just 2 or 3 lines from this commentary called Nectar of Manjushri's Wisdom, Nectar of Manjushri's Speech, page 422. When bodhisattvas achieve the concentration called the treasury of space, 500 great treasures appear to their right and 500 to their left. Everything manifests from empty space according to their wish. In the same way, may all beings constantly enjoy immense possessions in harmony with the Dharma. So that's the thought that you want to have with verse 28. I don't think I have really too many more. There's a few, but I wanted to go through some of these just so we know. This is the one that's very controversial. However many women there are in the world, may they all become men. And I like the way Pema Chodron gives some explanation of this. She says here on page 352 of No Time to Lose, she says, to understand this line, we have to know the context in which Shantideva was teaching. To be born a woman in 8th century India was not an asset. Even if you were wealthy, you were valued little more than a work animal and often treated worse. If you had spiritual aspirations to practice the Dharma, your gender was a great hindrance. Even today, nuns in part of Southeast Asia are treated very badly because of cultural prejudice. Nobody feeds them or takes care of their needs. This is the kind of inequity that Shantideva is addressing. His aspiration is for women to be relieved of this injustice and the pain it causes, and for them to be born into a situation free of prejudice. So it doesn't mean necessarily to be born as a man. It means to be born with the freedom and independence that men have more traditionally been given in patriarchal societies. And it's just a fact of our existence that this has been there and it continues to be there in many cultures, right? So she says then the message here is highly compassionate. If we suffer from any prejudice, such as gender, race, or religion, may we escape that injustice with all its inevitable difficulties and obstacles. So I thought I would say that before we read this together and you all flinch at saying something like that. Recognize that when you say it, that should be your intention. May all beings have that freedom and independence to be able to practice whatever it is that they wish to do. Then the last line of verse 32, abandon the actions of the Maras. I think we've touched on the 4 Maras before. Only one of these is an actual being, a sort of demon, and it's called the Devaputra Mara, the son of the gods, which is sort of this Cupid-like being that shoots you with an arrow, they say, and causes these delusions to arise. But the other Maras are all of what we have in our own continuum, the Maras of the afflictions, the Mara of the aggregates, and the Mara of the Lord of Death, that we are subject to impermanence. We want to be free of all of these that represent what forces are opposed to our well-being. Then we go on. May Dakinis, Rakshasas, and so forth. Dakinis, you've probably heard of these, often referred to in the Tantric teachings, but Dakinis are translated as sky goers generally, and they are these divine celestial female beings, very sacred beings, playing particular roles in Tantra that I won't be going into. But so we're talking about they're often very benevolent beings, but then Rakshasas are cannibalistic demons who are sort of the opposite of those. But we want all beings, regardless of where they are at in that continuum, from very compassionate and loving and benevolent to very harmful and dangerous, to have minds of compassion. Let me see if there's anything else. And then it says in verse 51, may I too, until I attain the very joyous ground. That's that first ground that I mentioned earlier, where it's on the path of seeing, where you enter into the very joyful or the very joyous. And that is the first ground where you've attained your direct realization of emptiness for the first time. And so may I too, Shantideva is saying, attain that by the kindness of Manjushri, Manjughosha. And I think that's all the references that I have that I needed to explain. I think that was it. All right, good. So now what I'm going to do is scroll back up so we get to the beginning of this, and we'll go through and recite this together. My scrolling may not always be perfect, as you've already noticed tonight. So just, hang in there with me. Let me just check one time to make sure that I don't have anything else that I need to share from this. We have this final verse. I may read through the commentary from Gyaltsep J on that final verse, verse 58. And that's for the very tail end. Okay. So let's just generate a really good motivation for doing this dedication, recalling again all of what we have done in this course in particular on chapter 9, but all the other time that we spent together going through this amazing text due to the kindness of Master Shantideva, all of those who preceded him from whom he learned these teachings, all of those who followed Shantideva, who kept these teachings alive, and especially His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who has made these teachings so central to Tibetan Buddhism, as well as our own precious guides, Khyabje's Zopa Rinpoche, Lama Zopa, as well as all the other spiritual guides that we and others have. Can be so indebted to their incredible kindness in keeping these teachings alive so we ourselves can study them. And we dedicate all the merit that we've accumulated through our study of this text for the greatest possible result using these verses from Master Shantideva. So again, let's go ahead and recite this, beginning with verse 1, even though this is more specific perhaps to Shantideva. By whatever virtue there is, due to my having composed engaging in the deeds of a bodhisattva, may all migrating beings engage in the deeds of the bodhisattvas. However many sick people there are, suffering in body and mind in all directions, due to my merit, may they obtain an ocean of happiness and joy. For as long as they remain in cyclic existence, may their happiness never decline. May migrating beings obtain an uninterrupted flow of unsurpassable happiness. However many hell beings there are throughout the realms of the worlds, may those embodied beings be delighted by the happiness of Sukhavati. May those wretched due to cold obtain warmth. May those wretched due to heat be cooled. By the infinite rivers arising from the great clouds of the bodhisattvas, may the forest of sword-like leaves also become a pleasant grove. May the Shalma trees, too, grow into wish-fulfilling trees. May they be beautified by the melodious calls of wild duck, geese, and swans. May the regions of hell become charming due to pools of large and sweetly fragrant lotuses. May the heaps of coals also become piles of jewels. May the burning iron ground be revealed as crystal floors. May the mountains of mass destruction hell become celestial mansions of offerings filled with sugatas. May the rain of glowing cinders, burning rocks, and weapons from now on become a rain of flowers. May the striking of each other with weapons from now on be a playful tossing of flowers. May those drowning in the fire-like river without ford, their flesh entirely disintegrated and their bones the color of kunda flowers, attain bodies of gods by the force of my virtue, and then dwell with goddesses in gently flowing streams. Wondering why are the henchmen of Yama, did I miss a verse? I'm sorry, I may have missed a verse. No, I didn't. Okay, sorry. No, I didn't, sorry. Wondering why are the henchmen of Yama and the terrible ravens and vultures afraid? Whose strength is the fine strength that utterly dispels darkness and generates happiness and joy? Upon looking upward, they behold Vajrapani abiding blazing in the mist of space. By the force of their strong joy, may they be freed from negativities and be in his company. Having seen the fire of the hells splattered and extinguished by a falling rain of flowers mixed with scented water, immediately satiated with bliss and wondering what had caused this, may the hell beings behold Padmapani. Friends, discarding fear, come from the distance, Why flee when directly in front of us is the one whose strength we are freed from suffering and the force of joy emerges, the one who thoroughly protects all migrating beings and has generated bodhicitta and mercy, the youthful one with a blazing topknot who removes all fears. Behold him in an attractive mansion resounding with the melodious eulogies of thousands of goddesses, with hundreds of gods paying homage at his lotus feet with their crowns and his eyes moist with compassion, a rain of clusters of many flowers falling upon his head. Upon seeing Manjushri in this way, may the hell beings exclaim, thus, by my roots of virtue, having seen the comfortable, cool, and fragrant rain falling from the unobscured clouds of bodhisattvas such as Samantabhadra, who was another one of those among the 8, may the sentient beings of hell become joyful. May the animals be freed from the fear of being eaten by one another. May the hungry ghosts be as happy as the human beings of unpleasant sound. May the hungry ghosts be satiated by the flow of milk descending from the hand of Arya Lord Avalokiteshvara, and by washing in it, may they always be refreshed. May the blind see and the deaf always hear sounds, just as it was for Maya Devi. May pregnant women give birth without being harmed. May the naked obtain clothing, the hungry obtain food, and the thirsty obtain water and delicious drinks. May the destitute obtain wealth. May the wretched with sorrow find joy. May the depressed be comforted and attain perfect steadfastness. Whoops. However many sick beings there are, may they quickly be freed from their illnesses. May all the diseases without exception of migrating beings never occur again. May the frightened be fearless. May those bound be released. May the weak be strong, and may their minds be mutually friendly. May all travelers be happy in every direction whatsoever. May their aims for which they travel be effortlessly accomplished. May those who sail in boats and ships fulfill their wishes. Having happily returned to shore, may they be joyfully united with their relatives. May anguished wanderers who have gone astray in deserts meet with other travelers, and without fear of robbers, thieves, tigers, and others, may they proceed easily without fatigue. May the unprotected children and elderly, lost and anxious in desolate places and the like, those intoxicated with sleep and the insane, be watched over by the gods. May beings be liberated from the non-leisures and be endowed with faith, wisdom, and mercy, and through food and conduct becoming perfect, may they always recollect their lives. May everyone, just like Space Treasury, have uninterrupted resources without conflict and without harm. May they enjoy themselves in freedom. May the sentient beings with little splendor become greatly magnificent. May the poor forms of ascetics become fine and perfect forms. However many women there are in the world, may they all become men. May the lowly attain high status, and may the proud be subdued. Due to this merit of mine, may all sentient beings without exception abandon all negativities and always create virtue. May they never be parted from the mind of enlightenment, exert themselves in the bodhisattva conduct, be cared for by the Buddhas, and abandon the actions of the Maras. May all these sentient beings have immeasurably long lives. May they always live in happiness and not even know the term death. May gardens of wish-fulfilling trees be full in all directions, with Buddhas and the Buddha's children filled with the hearing and the proclaiming of the Dharma. May the ground everywhere be pure, without pebbles and so forth, as even as the palm of the hand, the nature of Vaidurya and soft. I forgot to comment on that. It's reference to this very precious blue substance, sometimes called lapis, but Rinpoche has been calling it sapphire recently. For all the circles of retinues that exist, may many bodhisattvas abide, adorning the surface of the earth with their excellence. May all embodied beings continually hear the sound of the Dharma, coming from the birds and the trees, from every ray of light, as well as from the sky. May they always meet Buddhas and the Buddha's children. May they present offerings to the gurus of migrating beings with infinite clouds of offerings. May the gods also send down timely rain, and may crops be plentiful. May kings act in accordance with the Dharma. May worldly beings also prosper. May medicines be potent and the recitation of secret mantras be effective. May dakinis, rakshasas, and so forth be endowed with minds of compassion. May sentient beings never suffer, commit negativities, or become ill. May they not be afraid or despised, and may they never have unhappy minds. So you can see that's where that line was inserted in verse 41 that I alluded to earlier. May the monasteries flourish and excellently remain due to reading and recitation. May the Sangha always be concordant, and may the aims of the Sangha also be accomplished. May monks who wish to train also find solitude, having abandoned all distractions. May they meditate with serviceable minds. May nuns have material things and abandon quarreling and inflicting harm. Likewise, may all the ordained not degenerate their morality. Through being disenchanted by corrupt morality, may negativities forever be exhausted. Also, having attained good migrations, may disciplined conduct never decline, not decline even there. May the wise be honored, and may they also receive alms. May their continua be completely pure, and may they be renowned in all directions. May beings not experience the suffering of the bad migrations, and also not undergo any austerities. With bodies superior to those of gods, may they quickly achieve Buddhahood. May all sentient beings many times make offerings to all the Buddhas. Due to the infinite bliss of the Buddhas, may they always be endowed with happiness. May Bodhisattvas accomplish the welfare of migrating beings as intended. May sentient beings also acquire whatever the protectors intended. Likewise, may solitary realizers as well as hearers be happy. May I too, until I attain the very joyous ground, by the kindness of Manjushri, always recollect my former lives and always receive ordination. May I be robust, even though the food may be simple, and live. In all my lives, may I find ideal isolated places. Whenever I desire to look, or even if I wish to ask the slightest question, may I behold without any hindrance the protector, Manjushri himself, in order to accomplish the welfare of all sentient beings who extend to the ends of space in the 10 directions. May my deeds also be just like the deeds of Manjushri. For as long as space endures, and for as long as sentient beings remain, for that long may I abide and eliminate the sufferings of migrating beings. May the sufferings of migrating beings, no matter how many there are, all ripen upon me. Due to the Bodhisattva Sangha, may migrating beings enjoy happiness. May the sole medicine for the sufferings of migrating beings, the source of all happiness, the teachings, together with gain and honor, remain for a very long time. I prostrate to Manjushri, by whose kindness virtuous minds arise. I prostrate also to my virtuous friends, by whose kindness I develop. So maybe again, we'll just go through that commentary on the very end of this. The last page of Gyaltsab Je. He says, I prostrate to the special virtuous teacher Manjushri, the empowering condition, through whose kindness the meditation on Bodhichitta and then training in the actions, as well as the virtuous awareness to compose the treatise, taking these as the subject, arose. I also prostrate to the virtuous friend, through whose kindness I was inspired to engage into the trainings, and who gave strength for the virtuous side by generating the realizations of listening, contemplating, and meditating in my continuum. This last chapter explains elaborately the training in the generosity of giving away body, possessions, and roots of virtue for the purpose of others, with the dedication taking as objects and transforming them with strong aspiration into the temporary and ultimate objectives of prayer, both the temporary welfare of others as well as the final goal for all beings to attain Buddhahood. Since the training in generosity was also explained earlier, I did not write a separate chapter on generosity. And he did talk a little bit about generosity in various places and the offerings as part of the 7 limbs and what have you, but didn't really do, again, as detailed exposition on generosity. So in this way, we dedicate very strongly that all these merits produce these results that Master Shantideva himself aspired to achieve through his composing this text. So one thing that is very auspicious to do, they say, at the end of any teaching on an extensive text like this, is to go back and read at least the first verse that we started with, to kind of create the causes for us to be able to study this together again, individually, as well, but if we can, to create the causes for us all to have that opportunity, maybe not in this life, but maybe in a pure land somewhere we can study it with some great holy being there. So we'll read together the very first verse of this amazing text. Respectfully, I pay homage to the Sugatas who are endowed with the Dharmakaya, as well as to their children and to all who are worthy of homage. Here I shall describe how to engage in the vows of the Sugata's children, the meaning of which I have summarized in accordance with the scriptures. It's kind of nice to revisit that first verse as well, because it explains everything that we've done over these over 2 years since I started with the first 3 chapters at the center there in New York and in Brooklyn in 2019. So anyway, but how we got instruction from Shantideva extensively about how to engage in the Bodhisattva vows, essentially, which are based in the 6 perfections, the means of accomplishing the path to enlightenment. And he's summarized all of those in accord with the scriptures and everything else that he has learned from his teachers. So thank you very much, really. I mean, I'm so grateful for the opportunity to go through this text with all of you. And I hope you've all benefited from it. And I will put these teachings into practice as best as you can. I know it's difficult because we've gotten so many teachings over the course of these 2 years. And the Tibetan Buddhist path, as you know, is not a simple one, very complex, but little by little, we continue to create the causes and eventually we'll attain that goal. I also, before we do our final dedication prayers, do want to dedicate or to acknowledge and thank everyone from Shantideva Center who's been so instrumental, as well as Namdro Ling, Maria, who's not here with us tonight, unfortunately. And I did hear the sad news recently that Maria informed me that Namdro Ling is going to have to close its doors, unfortunately. It just simply wasn't the energy to make it beyond the pandemic here and to keep things going. And so, but anyway, I'm so grateful for Jennifer, her leadership in the board, and for Sneh and Sheila, who've been not only helping, but have been at every one of these classes, as well as Sean's support and what have you, and all of you from Shantideva Center, as well as from Namdro Ling study group. I'm so appreciative of all of your kind support throughout this course. And again, we'll look forward to being with all of you in other ways. I will be teaching the Exploring Buddhism course that Venerable Tendrin has been doing beginning in the new year. I'll at least do 1 module, and then Venerable Lexok, very esteemed monk who is in the Geshe Studies program, will be completing his Geshe degree soon. He'll do the next module, and then I may be coming back probably for the 3rd module that in the new year. So just so you know, I'm not leaving you all, and I'll be back with you in that form and that teaching. But I'm so grateful to all of you for the opportunity to do this. So thank you so much. Let's do our final dedication prayers. Let's see, get those on the screen if I can figure out. There they are. Okay. Okay. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel Bodhichitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. And again, these amazing teachers who are still with us, fortunately, and we can make prayers that they continue to be with us. These 2 guides that we're dedicating for His Holiness and Lama Zopa, as well as all the other spiritual guides that we and others have a karmic connection with. We make strong prayers that they continue to be in this world, because as was just pointed out in this text, we need these beings to attain enlightenment. And so may they continue to be here. Let's create that positive energy from our side so that everyone will benefit from their presence in this world. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Then we make this wonderful prayer for Lama Zopa. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjuna's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers, honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And let's make our own personal dedications at this time, as we always do. Again, extending this merit out, giving it away completely, not holding any of it back so that others can benefit from it. And we think in particular about those beings that we know or whose situation we've heard of, where they're experiencing obstacles, where they have illness, they are dying, or perhaps those who have died recently. We send this energy out. It becomes the cause to relieve them of their suffering immediately and to help them to have all happiness. May all beings have these same results through what we have done here tonight. So I realized I didn't have time for questions tonight. If any of you do have questions, please forward them on to me. But tonight wasn't so complicated, just a lot of dedication stuff. So anyway, again, I'm so appreciative, and I wish you all the best in your continued studies and practice of the Dharma, and I'll look forward to seeing you all again very soon. So thank you all so much.
Thank you so very, very much.